President Peter, fellow Rotarians and guests, it is my pleasure this afternoon to introduce to you Fraser Ainsworth. Fraser has had a lifetime's experience in the oil and gas industry, and in the bulletin there's a fairly full description of his life and times so far. He is speaking on oil and gas, which of course has changed dramatically. Fraser spoke to us in August 2013, and it's quite surprising what has happened in those intervening months. To give you a quick idea, and three quick points. First of all, the price of oil dropped some 45% from US 110 to $60 to US $60 a barrel. This, of course, has resulted in lower prices at the petrol pumps, and the price has been 119 cents a litre, well down on what we were paying before. Santos incurred a headline loss of $935 million. That's its first loss for some 29 years. Fracking techniques, which previously have resulted in the production of uneconomic reserves of gas and oil, are now being converted into economic reserves of gas and oil. So, with those sort of changes that are all taking place, I now ask Fraser to address you.
Thank you, Arvin. And thank you for inviting me. I think there must be an affliction of masochism or self-inflicted pain in this club, because it is only 18 months since I spoke to you last, and one would have thought you could do better. I'll do my best today. A couple of weeks ago, my wife and I saw the movie the second best exotic Marigold Hotel, and one line in it really caught my attention, and it was Maggie Smith speaking to Judi Dench in the course of their conversation, and Maggie Smith suddenly remarked, "Just because I'm looking at you when you're talking to me doesn't mean at all that I'm thinking at all about what you're saying to me." Now, if thinking about this subject was assessed by the quality of the presentation, there's a fair chance that there won't be a lot of thinking. There might be a lot of looking going on, but not much thinking. However, I do suggest that the topic in itself, namely oil and gas, does warrant pretty serious thinking, because it affects all of us in very different ways, and not just people in this room, not just in Australia, but people all around the world. So hopefully we'll be not just looking, but we'll be thinking. August 2013, I covered basically my involvement in three companies, each in respect of their involvements in energy. And then I looked at the three major global developments affecting oil and gas. And I'll update you on just what's occurred in respect of those two facets. Firstly, on the three companies, and the three companies I described were firstly Envestra, secondly Horizon Oil, and thirdly Tarak. Envestra was Australia's largest distributor of natural gas, and I think the inaugural Managing Director of Envestra, Ollie Clark, is with us today. After nearly an 18-month period of corporate activity, so to speak. Late last year, the Hong Kong-based CKI Group was successful in a cash takeover bid for Envestra, which valued Envestra at $2.4 billion. And it is common consensus that the Envestra shareholders, in fact, did very well out of that at a price of $1.32 cash. Horizon Oil, I'd like to focus really on one main aspect of Horizon Oil, and that is the consequences of the oil price fall, about which I'll say more later. Well, Horizon Oil has nearly all of its oil covered or hedged through to mid-July 2016. Despite that, and despite the fact that, unlike most other companies in the oil and gas industry, there was no need to impair our assets as a result of the oil price fall, because the production of oil at our two producing oil fields, offshore New Zealand and offshore China, are clearly competitive even at oil prices of $50 a barrel. Despite that, despite those two aspects amongst others, Horizon's share price has suffered in line with the share price falls of most other organisations. And that is frustrating on the one hand. On the other hand, us types who've been in the oil and gas industry for many years say to ourselves, we've seen it all before, which I'll talk about more shortly. The third company, Tarak Australia, I mentioned last time that that's significant in an oil and gas context because about 30% of Tarak's cash operating costs consist of natural gas. And I also alluded to the fact we were looking intensively at alternatives to natural gas from the grid, so to speak, namely biomass, burning what's left over from the grape mark after we treat it. It's a bit disappointing to reveal that there is just no way the economics for Tarak of biomass power generation, heat, can work. Thumbnail sketch of the three companies. Moving to the three global developments that I referred to, and to which I will add probably the most important of all, namely the oil price fall. Let me say at the outset, I confess that in August 2013, when I spoke to this club, I did not predict the oil price fall of the magnitude and of the timing that has occurred. The three aspects I spoke about were firstly the growth and significance of unconventional oil and gas, particularly in North America, and mainly consisting of oil or gas from shale. And the Americans have done an amazing job in developing the technology to extract oil and gas from shale, which is a bit like concrete in appearance, at prices generally acknowledged of oil, $70 or above, is competitive. It's had great significance, not just for the supply of oil and gas, not just for the companies involved, but it's been very significant for the American economy. Whereas previously, at gas prices of $14 a gigajoule, which is what they were, which is what encouraged so much of the application to unconventional shale gas, and the application for it and the discovery of it, the supply-demand interacted, and the price of natural gas dropped to 3 or 4. Supply-demand interaction. That's what brought it about. As a result, in the United States now, there are a very large number of energy-intensive industries which are re-establishing, either ones that were shut down, they're either being reopened, they're being expanded, and new plants are being established. And I read last month that the Chinese have actually invested in a substantial energy-intensive plant in the United States of America based on that cost competitiveness. It is a truly spectacular development, and it has implications for the oil price, which I'll come to in a minute. LNG was the second subject I dealt with, and the growth of LNG from zero in the 1960s to now about a bit over 250 million tonnes a year of LNG. LNG is really obviously liquefied natural gas, but in terms of volume it occupies about 1/600th of what methane would occupy in its gaseous state. Hence it facilitates transport in tankers and where it's not possible to transport the gas by pipelines. The industry has grown and grown very successfully. One project that I would like to mention, which is a recent development, is the successful completion of the Png LNG plant, which is led by Oil Search, whose board I was on for 8 years, and Exxon, with Santos a significant participant also. That project, which was a $19 billion project, was brought on ahead of time and on budget, apart from 2 or 3 years ago a modification for exchange rate changes, and has been acknowledged as one of the most successful LNG projects in the world for the last 2 or 3 years. This year it will ship 90 cargoes of LNG, and each of those cargoes would be capable of supplying South Australia's gas for 2 or 3 weeks. Gives you an idea of the magnitude of it. The third I spoke about was energy efficiency, and Exxon have calculated that demand increases for energy will be, over the next 30 years, roughly 140% on what they are now. But about half of that will be met by way of supply from increased efficiencies. In other words, a continuation of the existing efficiencies that are being achieved. Things like hybrid cars, more efficient gas-fired power generation, etc. The fourth I'm adding today is of course the oil price fall. Depending on which measure you take, but it's roughly 50% fall over the last 6 months. Why? Well, several reasons, but basically, as in the past, the interaction of supply and demand. Supply has been significantly increased by the North American unconventional shale oil that I referred to earlier. Oil consumption is in the order of 90 million barrels of oil a day worldwide, and the North Americans have increased their unconventional oil production to between 4 and 5 million barrels a day. And that has meant a big difference in the supply equation. In the past, the Saudis, or OPEC, led by the Saudis, have responded to that by cutting output to sustain their output to sustain the price. OPEC, Saudis in particular, have said no way this time. They met last November and they took a conscious decision they would not interfere with their own output, And what's more, they said, and we're not going to meet until June 2015 to even think about doing that. And their stated motivation for that position is, why should we, OPEC, why should we give up our market share of global oil to basically subsidise high-cost producers, and in particular North American unconventional oil? That's coincided with softening in the growth of demand for oil. So you've got a bit of a double whammy. Growth has tapered in China and also in Europe. Not dramatically, but when you get a significant increase in supply and a reduction in demand growth, of course, that's a recipe for, price falls. And that's what's happened. Added to which there's a lot of liquidity, not liquid oil, but liquid cash, sloshing around global financial systems at the moment, massive amounts of it. Looking for a home, a lot of it's speculative in nature, and there is an enormous amount of speculation going on in buying and selling oil futures, which exacerbates, of course, the fundamental interaction, the fundamentals of supply-demand interactions. What's going to happen to the oil price? I'd be deceptive if I said I know. I don't know. I'm not even prepared to give an educated guess. I do know, however, that people who are far more expert, far more experienced, are saying that, bearing in mind the high cost of much of the North American unconventional oil production, it's only a matter of time before the oil recovers to, and it's the to what and by when that is in doubt. And the common consensus is that it will go from, and I'm talking about Brent oil now, from the current late 50s or high 50s, let's say $60, it will creep up in increments of $5, $10 a barrel through to 2018, where it will stabilise at in the range of $70 to $90 a barrel thereafter. But I don't know. Now, thank you again for inviting me. And I'm not going to accuse or even infer that people in this room have not been both looking and thinking. But I certainly invite you to demonstrate that you are thinking by inviting you to ask me some questions. Totally different. Totally different.
And why has that second system failed? Mr. Wilson, why has that second system failed? Is it just too expensive?
Basically it's cost. Yeah, but I don't pretend to be an expert on it, but it is largely cost. And the cost of it hasn't gone down, but the cost of the unconventional shale or tight gas, in other words, low porosity or permeability, and the ability to get it out and get it out economically is just really improved quite substantially.
Fraser, one of the things that doesn't appear to feature highly in the media coverage is the impact of ISIS in the Middle East and some of the nonsense that they're going on with oil wells and whatever. Would you care to comment?
Well, I don't pretend to be an expert on ISIS.
Oil.
Yeah, but the hard facts are, of course, pretty sketchy on this. But my reading would indicate, and I think The Economist in particular wrote a very thoughtful article about this, and it quoted figures which demonstrate that really oil in the areas controlled by ISIS and the export of that oil onto global markets has not decreased at all. And it is as a result of a very sophisticated smuggling network, you know, where you've got it being produced and then you've got 2 or 3 or more middlemen or women in between, and it is indeed and continues to be the most significant source of finance of ISIS's activities. So they've got a vested interest in keeping it going through the lines. If only it could be cut off.
We've one time for one question from Chris. Yeah.
Thank you, Fraser. Very interesting press and in interesting times. When you were describing OPEC's actions, or lack of actions, whatever, you used very moderate language. It seems, however, that OPEC has set out, if it can, to do some serious damage to the North American initiatives in shale oil in particular. Would you rule out that war, I'll use that word, might get even tougher in the short and medium term?
The last point of the question is it likely to get more tougher, or and my answer is I would think it very unlikely, because OPEC, and I have some sympathy for their position, I've got to say. There you are, you're producing oil at $5 or $6 a barrel, and these people who it's costing $70 a barrel to produce come in and take a significant part of your market share. Are you going to help them?
No, I agree.
Yeah, I think OPEC's behaving actually quite rationally, and I think the Americans acknowledge that, and they're saying their response to it is, as they are already done, just over the last 12 or 18 months, their improvement in costs of their unconventional oil production has been quite spectacular, and they're, as we know, they live or die by interaction of supply and demand and market forces. And a byproduct is, and this is Machiavellian thinking, low oil prices for a prolonged period have a habit of unseating dictators or nasty people running regimes. And this oil price is most unhelpful to Iran, and it's also probably even more unhelpful combined with the sanctions against, well, not so much Russia as Vladimir Putin in particular, personally.
Thank you indeed, Fraser, for that talk, and I'll ask all the Rotarians to please stand. Thank you, boss. I'll make a presentation.